to the Rock Talk Studio, the place to find your next great rock and roll book or documentary. This is the podcast that reviews, previews, and most importantly, recommends the good stuff. And today is part one of the kickoff to year 3. I'll be doing 2 episodes this week. Today's episode, I'll be doing the top 10 books of 2024, so you get all the great recommendations of last year. And then in 2 days, I'll do the top 10 docs of 2024. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. Here we go. It's time to kick off the top 10 books of 2024. And number 10 goes to Soul Serenade, King Curtis and His Immortal Saxophone by Timothy Hoover. This book just won an award in the RTS award show that came out a couple weeks ago. This book won the award for the book that I learned the most from. A lot of great knowledge in this book. King Curtis played with Buddy Holly. Jimi Hendrix was in King Curtis's band. He was the opener for the Beatles when they played Shea Stadium. One of his best friends was Duane Allman. Hoover, the author, makes it a point to show how appreciated King Curtis was to almost everyone who ever worked with him. Hoover spent 20 years on this book, and it really shows. And even though I felt the strong appreciation that Hoover gets across in telling the story, he doesn't go too far and make you feel like you're just reading a love letter to Curtis. This book is deeply researched, and it provides a ton of testimonials. The book really lays out how talented King Curtis was. A little behind the scenes, when the book was first presented to me, I said no. I was hesitant to read it and put it on the show because I didn't know if this was really going to work with you, the audience, that you wanted to hear about King Curtis. But once I started reading it and starting understanding how much he played a part in rock and roll, I didn't think it was rock and roll enough, but it definitely is. This is a great book, and I am glad I was wrong because I can't say enough good stuff about this book. Soul Serenade, King Curtis and His Immortal Saxophone by Timothy Hoover. Number 9. The number 9 position goes to Under a Rock, Chris Stein's memoir, Chris Stein of Blondie. And this book is full of gritty, dark street tales. It's mixed with Stein's endless creativity. You bounce around from Blondie press junkets to sleazy New York apartments to come-and-go characters with strange names and stranger habits. It's a whirlwind of creativity mixed with wild adventures and a life lived for most of the story on the fringe. I learned a ton about his life outside of Blondie, which was really intriguing and full of other projects that he was into, the soundtrack work, photography, which he has really become recognized for, art installations, his interest in magic is talked about, theater, and of course, music and his work with Blondie. Stein was streetwise and thrived on living in New York in the seedier parts of town. He just had this way of taking things in stride, multiple band distractions and breakups, muggings, even a kidnapping, and a lot of drug-fueled craziness are what make up this book and his fascinating life as an artist. Very interesting read, Chris Stein's memoir, Under a Rock. And number 8 on the rock and roll book list this year goes to She's a Badass, Women in Rock Shaping Feminism by Catherine Yeske Taylor. The book takes 20 female rockers and explores their take on not only feminism, but what it like to be a rock and roll star. You've got Ann Wilson of Heart, Suzi Quatro, which is probably the first female rock star, Exene Cervenka of X, Gina Shock of the Go-Go's, Sherry Curry of the Runaways, Joan Osborne's in there, Tanya Donnelly, Amy Ray of the Indigo Girls, Suzanne Vega, Donita Sparks of L7, Orianthi, and a few of the modern rockers. And I really enjoyed the way the author Yeske Taylor moved the conversation along in this book. She has a witty way of placing subtle interjections into the story that was just enough perspective to balance out her questions. It's not just a straight up interview with the rockers. The conversations have a timely rhythm to them. The questions are kind of interspersed with personal stories about the artist. It was really interesting to see how they used a ton of grace and sheer determination to be a better person in a difficult situation. and then to take those situations and use them to empower others and show them that women rockers can be total badasses. A lot of these rockers really shunned away from the feminist side of the conversation and really were more about how appreciative they were about their opportunity to be in the world of rock and roll. This is a very interesting read. I really enjoyed it. She's a Badass, Women in Rock Shaping Feminism by Catherine Yeske Taylor. Number 7, Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell by Ann Powers. Ann Powers is a highly decorated music critic, one of the best. She works for NPR. She worked for Rolling Stone. She worked for a lot of different publications. She is extremely insightful and leans into her critic persona instead of just writing a biography about Joni Mitchell. This is not a biography, and it's also not a straight-up telling of Mitchell's life. Powers explores and questions Mitchell's ways and looks at her own life and how she has dealt with similar situations and feelings to kind of tell this story. She uses Joni's life to answer questions in her own life and wrestles with some of the uncomfortable places that it takes her. This was a very unique read, very interesting. The writing is really intelligent and really well done. It's a study of Mitchell's creativity and how it reverberated in so many different directions. It's a deep look at Mitchell's music and the way she navigated her life as a woman artist and how that affected not only Joni, but Powers as well. There is a lot here about culture, about feminism, about race. It covers a lot of different subjects. The chapters are like giant think pieces and are packed with commentary. Power has written this very different book. I was really impressed with the depth which she explores not only Joni Mitchell, but herself. Great read. Number 7, Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell by Ann Powers. Number 6, an award winner, I Don't Want to Go Home, The Oral History of the Stone Pony by Nick Corasaniti. This book just won the award for the best book not about a band or a band member. It's about a place, the iconic Stone Pony. And this book lines up a ton of musicians to tell this story. Of course, Bruce Springsteen is there. He does the foreword. He gets the last word in the book, as he should. There's a lot of Springsteen running through this, but there's a ton of other musicians lending the name to their story. A lot of great insight about what it's like to play and be around the Stone Pony during its time. But what really sets this book apart, and most importantly, is that it was made up of not only the musicians, but a ton of other people that actually ran the Stone Pony or were associated in some way. So you've got bartenders, you got doormen, you got the 3 owners that own the club, local DJs, politicians, photographers, a very comprehensive look at this long line of what it took to keep this place open and how iconic it was and has been and still is to this day. Really great book. I Don't Want to Go Home, The Oral History of the Stone Pony by Nick Corasaniti. All right, that wraps the first 6 books, 6 through 10 of 2024. Coming up next, we're going to do the top 5 rock and roll books in the Rock Talk Studio Library of 2024. Before I jump into the top 5 books of the year, I want to share with you something that I'm up to and something that I put together to try to add to the value of what I do with the Rock Talk Studio, and that is try to be the source, that one place for you to go to learn about new rock and roll books and documentaries. So what that is I've come up with a monthly blast. And the monthly blast is a kind of pseudo newsletter where I put together a rolling top 5. So every month there's new artists added to a top 5 list as we go through the year. I've also got information about new releases, new announcements, opportunities to win new books, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So the monthly blast is easy to get. It's free. It comes out only one time a month, so I'm not going to bug you with a bunch of emails. All you have to do is email me at info@rocktalkstudio to get into the monthly blast. Again, one time a month. It's the last Friday of every month. And when you choose to sign up for the monthly blast, you get entered to win all the cool rock and roll books that I'm starting to give away. I gave away a book called Rush at 50 last month. This month coming up, I'm going to be giving away the new Robin Hitchcock book called 1967, How I Got There and Why I Never Left. Fantastic book. And then coming up after that, it's going to be another book that landed in the top 10 list that I went through today. So there's a lot of good stuff coming up. All you have to do again is send me an email at info@rocktalkstudio.com. I'll put that in the show notes, and that'll sign you up for the monthly blast. All right, let's do it. Top 5 books of 2024. Going to start the countdown with number 5, and that is Geddy Lee's memoir, My Effin' Life. This book is a must for all Rush fans. It is very deep, and it encompasses everything you need to know about Rush, but it also takes a very personal look at Geddy's family and the hardships of surviving a Nazi prison camp. It's an amazing story of how his parents met in the prison camp, survived the prison camp, and then found each other after. It's an unbelievable story, and that's just the beginning of the book. There's not a lot that Geddy holds back in telling how Rush just spent so many years on the road, just touring, recording, just back and forth for years. But the in-between all that is the brotherhood that the 3 members, Alex, Neil, and Geddy, formed, and how they loved each other and loved playing with each other. Geddy has a great personality, one of the best in rock and roll. He's just a rock and roll character, and his warmth and respect and gratitude for his life and being able to play the music with his friends and how much he appreciates the audience really comes through in the book. This was another award winner this year. My Effin' Life won the best book about a band member. Very deserving. Great book, great memoir. Geddy Lee's My Effin' Life. There's a lot of memoirs in the top 5. And number 4 is another great memoir, and that's Alex Van Halen's memoir called Brothers. It's like Beethoven's brother wrote a book. Eddie Van Halen was mine, and probably most people's listening to this show's Jimi Hendrix. He was our Jimi Hendrix. He introduced the new sound out of the electric guitar. And this is the story of how he was able to bring that sound to life. You feel for the 70-year-old Alex Van Halen in this as he misses his brother while going through how the inspiration of his mother and father catapulted them to a level of stardom they could have never imagined. This book is not only the story of a band, Van Halen, but it's really a story of the 2 brothers, and it's not to be missed. Alex Van Halen Brothers. Number 3, the 3rd best book in 2024, and that award goes to, the name of this band is REM. By Peter Ames Carlin. And this book was a very late addition to my top 10 as I read it in the last few weeks of November. But it was so powerful in the way the author Peter Ames Carlin mixed the stories of the 4 members of the band into the larger story of how this underground college sensation who broke a new alternative sound became huge stars while sticking together as a unit through the usual band label touring personal life comings and goings. It's a very thorough presentation of the band. It's written with such ease that you just get captivated by the story and the personality of the 4 band members. I burned through this book and loved every page. There wasn't any lag at all across this huge story of REM, another award winner. This one won the award for the best book about a band. The name of this band is REM by Peter Ames Carlin, the number 3 rock and roll book of the year. 2 more books to go, and number 2 is another memoir. So there's 3 memoirs in the top 5. This one is 1967, How I Got There and Why I Never Left by Robin Hitchcock, the book that I'm giving away. It is tremendous. And who would have saw this one coming? For a rock and roll memoir, Robin Hitchcock has crafted a witty, odd, engaging snapshot of the year 1967 when he was sent off to boarding school. This is a story like the title tells us about how he got to this boarding school and really why he never left the mindset of 1967. And why he never left there in his mind is because his discovery of music, specifically the first time he heard Rubber Soul by the Beatles, and then the Whopper, the first time he heard Bob Dylan. And that really opened up his mind and took him to a place that became the focus for the rest of his life. This book is full of teenage angst and irony and self-reflection. It's written with a raw honesty that's both engaging and nostalgic. and I found it the perfect mix of humor and melancholy. It's really well done. It's a very different story, a very unique story, a well-written story, and an absolute beautiful piece about how music can change people and, more importantly, unite people. This is the number 2 book of the year. It is really good. 1967, Robin Hitchcock. Coming up next, the number 1 book of the year after the break. Before we get to that number 1 title of the year, I do want to tell you about this Substack newsletter that I've been reading that I really think you're going to find interest in. So I want to shout out to Long Live the ABB. It's conversations from the crossroads of Southern music, history, and culture from historian Bob Beatty. And Bob Beatty is the author of Play All Night, Duane Allman and the Journey to Fillmore East, one of my favorite books of last year. You can find the review in the archives. I think it's episode 10. He also won an award for the best book about a band member. If you're into Duane Allman, if you're into the Allman Brothers, I highly suggest not only checking out the book, but this really cool newsletter that comes out. I just read a great article that he did about how the band launched a tour after Duane's death, playing 90 shows without Duane. That was really interesting. And there was also an article recently about Allman Brothers being a people's band. He put together playlists that surrounds the article. It's a really well done newsletter. And this guy knows his Allman Brothers. I think Bob puts out the best content about the Allman Brothers anywhere. Really great stuff. Long live the ABB newsletter. Check it out. I hope you enjoyed the show today so far. The top 10 books of 2024. These are my favorites. These are the best recommendations I have for you. So if you're looking for that next great rock and roll book, there's some really good choices to choose from. But I've only given you 9. There's 1 more left. And that last book to cover is my number 1, my book of the year. And that goes to Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon by Joel Selvin. It's the story of drummer Jim Gordon, whose legacy as one of the greatest drummers of all time is looked at, and how his life was stunted by severe mental health issues. Gordon played for the famous LA session team, the Wrecking Crew. He drummed on the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations record. He played on Pet Sounds. He was the drummer on Joe Cocker and the Mad Dog Englishman's tour. He was the drummer in Derek and the Dominoes. His resume is long, and he was a heralded drummer. The book takes you not only deep inside Gordon's career and how amazing it was, but it also charts his harrowing battle with undiagnosed schizophrenia. Renowned music critic Joel Selvin did an incredible job with handling the very sensitive subject of mental health while exposing the enormous talent of Jim Gordon as a drummer. Selvin was able to work with Gordon's family after Jim died in prison to try and understand the daily challenges he faced and how the voices in his head, untreated, led him to killing his mother. It's one of rock and roll's most jarring stories, and Selvin maneuvers a story around Gordon as he becomes increasingly unpredictable and delusional. The details that the author supplies of Jim Gordon's demise are heartbreaking. This book hits deep, and it does not shy away from the truth of who Jim Gordon was and who he became after he was unable to control the demons in his head. And even though the subject matter is hard to handle at times, this is an amazing book with really, really outstanding writing. The number 1 book of the year, Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon by Joel Selvin. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Love getting a chance to turn you on to the best rock and roll books of 2024. But what about the best docs of 2024? Well, that's coming up in the next episode, which will be in 2 days. So I will see you in 2 days for the best rock and roll docs of 2024. All right, tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. We'll see you next time in the Rock Talk studio.